Welcome back to the My Latin Life podcast. Since 2014, My Latin Life has been your trusted guide to traveling and living in Latin America. Today we have a very special guest. His name is Thor Pedersen. He's the only person in history to have reached every country in the world completely without flying. Thor, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, and thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. We've had a couple people on the podcast that have been to every country or are interested. You probably know Rick Gazarian from Counting Countries,
Yeah,
right?
we're friends. And I listened to your episode with Henrik as well, which was a really good one.
Henrik as well, Henrik Jepsen, who's been to every country in the world. So I like your spin on things where you did it all without flying. I think that's a great way to really see the reality on the ground. And it says on your website on May 23rd, 2023, basically a year ago, Thor reached the final country, Maldives, completing the project and claiming world history.
Yeah, we need to sell some tickets. It's a year now. Then from that point on, I decided to go home over land and sea, and I'm in Denmark, which meant finding a way from the Maldives to Denmark without
True.
flying also. So it took me a few more months before I actually set foot back home in Denmark.
That's funny. Because a lot of people try to make their last country like a celebratory country, and they'll make it like where people can kind of come meet you and be like, woo, yeah. But you kind of did it almost as far as possible, where probably not so many people could come and have a beer with you.
I mean, a lot of people probably would pick a country like the Maldives to celebrate and have a nice memory from, and people did fly in to meet with me there. For me, it was about logistics, so I rounded up the project within the Pacific and was visiting all the Pacific Island nations, and then I had to get back to Denmark also without flying. And if you look at the world map, you're just the easiest route is to go back and then have the last two, Sri Lanka and Maldives, and then I'm on my way back home.
So I need to know, do you have a fear of flying? Have you taken a flight since then in the past year?
I have no fear of flying. I have flown a lot since coming back home. I've been invited to do talks. I've been invited for interviews. I've been on holiday. It was all because back in 2013, I found out that no one had gone to every country in the world completely without flying. And first, I found it really interesting. And then I was sort of just infected. And it stuck with me. And I felt like I was too old, that it wasn't in my cards to do something like that. But I kept thinking about it. I kept kicking it around. And
So how
eventually,
old were you
I
in
set out.
2013?
I was 34. So, yeah, I know 34 isn't really, really old, but at the same time, it's at a point in your life where you're probably supposed to start a family or maybe even have a family and a career and be working on on some plan for your life. And I had just met a wonderful woman. I just bought an apartment. I was 12 years into a shipping and logistics career, which was going well. So there was nothing pointing in the direction that I would uproot and try to go to every country without flying.
Hmm. So did that help you that you worked in the shipping and logistics industry?
I think it did, but not in the way that people necessarily would assume. It helped me because I knew the names of the shipping companies, and I knew where different companies were strong and where they focused. So, but I mean, I had no idea how to get on board a container ship and do that kind of stuff. And then the shipping and logistics, it also gives you a certain mindset in the same way that if you're a police officer or if you work at a factory, I mean, whatever we do in life, it shapes us. And within shipping and logistics, it's pretty fast paced and you're constantly trying to look for solutions when something doesn't go the way it was planned to go and help out clients and customers and so on. So highly service minded and also really good at finding solutions when needed.
Okay, well, I definitely want you to kind of teach us on this episode how to hitch a ride on container ships and so forth. So I wouldn't mind getting right into that, but I want to set the stage a little bit. So just so I understand, so you did it without flying. Obviously, when you're on a particular continent, that means you took some buses and some trains, right?
Yeah,
But
yeah.
when you had to go from one continent to another, you were on some sort of boat, right? There's no underground tubes that I'm aware of, right? So you took a lot of boats and
Well, I
ferries.
mean, Europe and Asia connects nicely, so
That's true. That's true.
I could do that. But yeah, no ships were involved, and I would aim to go.
Every island nation, you took a boat.
True,
Yeah.
true. Yeah, that was a bit of a hassle. But yeah, I mean, I would aim to go with a ferry if there was a ferry available. Scheduled transportation whenever I could do that, just buy a ticket and get on board. But there isn't much of that in the Pacific, and there actually isn't much of that in the Caribbean either, even though you can often see from one country to the next.
Yeah. So I guess what are kind of the range of options? So there's like public ferries where you buy a ticket, and that's probably the easiest. And then when that doesn't exist, what do? You go down to the marina and ask if anyone's, chartering a yacht or something, or you get on container ships. It's probably a mix of a couple different a couple different types of transportation, right?
Yeah, I mean, I've been on every kind of vessel you can imagine, so you can't really be picky. Often you just have to go with whatever works. I knew the Pacific was going to be hard, and there were three ground rules for the project. So one was I couldn't fly at any point. If I flew for any reason whatsoever, if I was getting evacuated or whatnot, then the project would be over. And then one was I had to spend a minimum of 24 hours in each country. So anything less than 24 hours wouldn't count.
I
And I
like that.
couldn't return home until I got to the last country. So it had to be in one go, and it ended up taking nearly 10 years.
Oh,
And
wow.
that's really not what I was gunning for. I was gunning for four. So I knew the Pacific was going to be hard. I knew that there were great distances and there were no ferries. So I planned that to be the last part of my journey. And the overall idea was that I would have a bigger online following, a bigger online presence, and more contacts, and an incentive that is probably easier to convince someone that they should help you if you only have a few countries left compared to having 150 countries left.
Hmm.
So I went from Europe over the North Atlantic to North America, then into South America, and then I had the Caribbean. And the Caribbean was like the first real test in terms of these vessels, because again, there aren't many ferries in the Caribbean. And what I ended up doing was going to marinas, and I bought myself a VHF radio, and I'd just get on the radio and go introduce myself and tell them where they could find me. Like if there'd be a little cafe or a small shop, I'd sit in front and then hope that someone would show up. And lots of people showed up, not because they could offer me a ride, but because they were really curious about who is this person. But once in a while, people would show up and say, we're going tomorrow. We'll have a family meeting, and now we met you, and we'll have a talk about it." And then and I don't think I ever struck out. I think people usually came back and said, "Okay, we had our family meeting. We'd like to have you on board," and then we crossed together.
And for people who don't know, what is a VHF radio?
It's a handheld radio where you can where you can get in touch with not only vessels, I guess, anyone who has a radio, you can get in touch with them. So ships of all sorts will have radio communication, and they will usually be dialed into channel 16, which is an open channel where you can call SOS, or you can call for an agent, or you can call another ship, and so on. And then once you get in touch with someone, you let's say I'm calling you, and then say, okay, great, let's go to channel 14 so we don't bother anyone on 16. And then we have our conversation on channel 14 or whatever we agree. And then afterwards, you'll switch it back to 16 so it's open so anyone can get a hold of you. So if people were following protocol, then I would be on my radio on channel 16 and I'd go, hello, hello, I'm Thor. I'm looking for a ride to Grenada. Come back to me, or yeah, come back to me on channel so and so, or come back and meet me where I'm at.
Hmm. And I saw online that you can even get little certifications for using these VHF radios, but is it pretty easy to use?
It's straightforward. It's almost like a toy. You can just go to any marina shop or any shop that services as sailboats and motorboats, and they'll probably just sell it over the counter. I'm not aware that you need a specific permit. I don't know. Times change, so I don't know if anything has changed over the years. But back then, I just bought one, and you put in batteries, and then you press a button, and then you're speaking, and you release the button, and then you can hear what people have to say.
And would you just leave it on like 16 hours a day?
Yeah, pretty much. I would. You have to be in range, but yeah, it's all that stuff depends on the antenna. If you have like a ship would be able to, I guess it's to the horizon, maybe even beyond the horizon. Um, I would have to be somewhere near the marina in order to be sure with a handheld radio that I could get in touch, and I couldn't have too many buildings between me and the vessels I was trying to get in touch with.
Hmm.
But yeah, yeah, it worked out. It worked out pretty well. I think it was worth the cost of the radio, at least.
Yeah, I remember Mark Zolo, previous podcast guest, was telling me he bought a like a dinky boat and did the Caribbean and almost got shipwrecked and stuff. But he would tell me when he would pull up to these marinas, he would, I guess, go to Channel 16 and see what people are talking about, and people would be like organizing, getting a beer, and doing kind of fun stuff on the radio frequency, communicating with people in the marina.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, you're not supposed to have your conversations on channel 16 because then you're blocking the channel for anyone else. But some people really don't follow protocol, and then if you're around China in that area, there's so much chatter going on channel 16 between the fishing boats. That's yeah.
That's funny. Speaking of, I guess, languages, you obviously speak extremely good English. Have you had to
Thank you.
pick up languages in your travels?
Not really. I'd say I built upon some of the language that I knew. I know a little bit of French and a little bit of Spanish, and I was able to expand somewhat on that. I'm sure I got better at English as I went along because I ended up speaking almost nothing else than English for most of 10 years and writing blogs in English and communicating in English in general. I know a little bit of Arabic. I know enough Arabic to make people believe that I speak Arabic. And then when they start talking back, then I'm lost.
Hmm. So you managed to do it basically with just all English and then a little French for Africa and so forth.
Yeah, I mean, as Spanish was a necessity throughout Central and South America, Latin America, a lot of the time people just wouldn't be able to speak English at a level where, or they would be embarrassed. Maybe they spoke some English and they just didn't. So I would have to do as well as I could in Spanish. I speak about 500 words of Spanish, or did, which is like, I can get a room, I can make people aware of who I am and where I'm from, and get some food and this kind of stuff. But a lot is lost in translation.
Do you felt like you lost your Danish a little bit?
Oh yeah, oh yeah, yeah, yeah. So I've been home for about a year now, and I'm still stumbling over words, mispronouncing stuff, and so many things come. I do a lot of speaking engagements, and as I was traveling, I did speaking engagements in 67 countries around the world. I did 140, I think, speaking engagements, and all of it was in English. So a lot of that stuff, I have it built in. It's I can almost sleep talk. I just know how to deliver certain sentences, and then suddenly having to do it in Danish was a lot harder. Plus, also some things just do not translate very well into Danish, so you have to reinvent.
Hmm. Well, since you are on the speaking circuit and do a lot of podcasts, we'll try to get some questions in here and information out of you that you don't normally get asked. Maybe actually, I'll put it to you. Is there anything that people don't ask you enough, or you've just been waiting for someone to ask you or something to talk about?
Oh, I'm sure there is, but I mean, generally, I don't get enough questions about my opinions on certain aspects of the world, or if there are I mean, I've seen a lot, and I came to learn a lot as I went through all these countries and all these cultures and met all of these people. And a lot of the time I'll just get asked, so what's your favorite ice cream, or what's your favorite country, or what's the most dangerous, or what was the most scary, or what was the most disgusting, that kind of stuff. I do like questions that are deeper. I like questions that relate to how I changed as a person, or what my perspective was on what I thought I was embarking on, and then now looking back, or what was I actually doing, and how do I feel about it now? That kind of stuff is far more interesting to me than trying to single out a good party city or something like that.
Okay. I did have one thing I wanted to ask you, which is why was it important to you to not go back to Denmark until you completed the journey? Like, couldn't you have just got a Eurorail pass and done 50 countries and then go back to Denmark and then, I don't know, take a boat somewhere else? Like, why was it important to you to do it all in one shot?
Yeah. I do like that question. I think that's a really, really good question, and there's a good answer to it as well. I wanted a clean definition of what would it be to go to every country in the world without flying. And I mean, without flying, there can be no flying. I thought that was just a given. Then the 24-hour thing it's a little stupid, but a lot of travelers clubs, and they go with a 24-hour stay is what
Uh-huh.
makes it valid. And at
Yeah.
least 24 hours is you. I mean, you spend the night and you get a few meals, and you're bound to meet people. So the no return home was because I did not want a debate about was this one journey or two journeys or five journeys or more. That this was in one go. It was one journey.
Hmm.
Yeah. So what happened? I left home and I thought, okay, we have a good definition, and I'll be back home within 4 years, 3.5 if I go pretty quick. And then and it took me probably a couple of years before those rules sort of dawned on me that that was a self-imposed prison, that even when I wanted to go home, I couldn't go home without giving up on what I had embarked on. So I essentially put shackles on myself, and without really, I was caught within my own ambition, I guess.
So I guess I'll put to you the question that you wanted, which is, you thought you were embarking on one type of journey, and maybe by the time you finished it, you had a different perspective on the journey. And now,
Yeah.
1 year reflecting back on it, how has your mindset shifted?
Well, that could be a really long conversation, but in general, I can tell you that I was naive leaving home. I did a great deal of planning. I guess I could have done more planning, but I did a great deal of planning, and I set out and I had a fixed route. And I thought I set out on the most amazing thing that the world had ever seen. I thought I would just have so much support. I thought that everyone would get it. I thought that everyone I met, everyone that I explained that I'm going to every country in the world without flying, they would just be on board, like companies, people, like anyone. I thought that it was just a question of time before I would be followed by a camera crew. I thought that I would get sponsorships from big companies. I thought, I was so naive in regards to, but I just thought, okay, this is historical. No one's done this before. It's every country. It's highly international. This is and yeah, that bubble eventually burst, and I started to realize how little people actually cared about it, and that it's good for a conversation, but it's people have their lives and their families and education and work and their own problems and that kind of stuff. Um, so yeah, the further I got into it, I found out that the true values probably weren't as much about my ambition to be the first to reach every country in the world without flying, or even if I would be the first to go to every country in the world without flying. I think that the true values in what I was doing was, as the project grew longer and longer, it became about stamina. It became about fighting for what, in my case, what I believe in, but also for other people what they believe in, and that it rubbed off on many people who would write me beautiful messages, telling me how they felt inspired to fight harder for what they wanted in their lives. So that was one element. Another was I was trying to promote every country I was going through in a positive sense, to, well, you can sort of say, give a little bit of um, a contrast, to sort of draw a contrast to everyday media. Everyday media has a tendency to be quite negative about the world. And that's not to say that there aren't bad things in the world, because there certainly are. But in my experience, if you go from country to country, people are just people, and most people are just trying to get by. So I tried to do this positive promotion, and I think that was important. And I think that also gave me a relatively positive view of the world, which I brought with me back home, and which I can now share with people. So when people say, well, certainly you cannot say anything positive about Syria, then I can. And certainly you can't say anything about, then I can, so I think those values became important to the project. I traveled as a goodwill ambassador of the Danish Red Cross since leaving home, and I met with the Red Cross, or with the Red Crescent, in practically every country in the world. They're in 191 countries around the world. And I was promoting the humanitarian work and symbolically connecting the movement and raising funds. And I think this had value. And as the years went on, and as the struggle got real, it became far less about reaching every country without flying. It was the actual values that existed within the project. And then I came to a realization that so Denmark is a country which once had a famous author called Hans Christian Andersen. And Hans Christian Andersen, he's famously quoted for "to travel is to live," which is out of context, but it's something he did right while on a train 160 years ago, 170 years ago.
Hmm.
And I've been contemplating about this: to travel is to live, to travel is to live, not just being a slogan that, get out there and pack your bags and meet people, but also what is living. And living is where you gain life experience. You gain life experience from life. Where else would you gain it? But is there a fast track to life experience? And I think there is. I think you gain more life experience you are when you are challenged. So if you're living a relatively easy life and you have the same routines, then you will gain life experience. But if you're challenged, I'm willing to bet you're gaining so much more life experience. And where are you commonly challenged? Well, you're challenged when you're taken out of your environment and put into another environment. And
Hmm.
that's certainly the case when you travel, you for good or for worse. When you're in a new country, it's maybe a different language, culture, what people they how they dress, the food, everything. And it might be hard to get a SIM card, or it might be hard to buy a ticket for a bus. You know, you have to work these things out. You do not automatically know everything. So I think I grew really really old over the past 10 years from constantly being challenged and gaining a lot of life experience.
What was the hardest part?
Central Africa was the hardest part for me. That I was at my breaking point. I was 2 years into the project. 2 years is such a long time to live a nomadic lifestyle in that way. Constantly living out of my backpack and moving forward, ticking off countries on this seemingly never-ending list. On average, 2 years in, on average, I was in a new country every 7 days, which is extreme within itself. And I was trying to do all these things: meeting with the Red Cross, writing a blog, updating social media, doing interviews, speaking at schools, and you know, it was really fast paced. And 2 years in, I could barely take it anymore. I was scraped pretty thin. And Central Africa, among most travelers, is just some of the hardest overland territory to deal with. There's such a beautiful part of the world that should be said. First of all, people are amazing, and there's a lot of life and sports and food and music and the flora and the fauna and the history and the culture. There's a lot of good to be said about Central Africa. The unfortunate element to Central Africa is the corruption. It is unbelievably corrupt, and there are many, many checkpoints, and it's somewhat off the hook. And if you look like I do, like a pale guy from Northern Europe, you stick out like a light bulb among everyone else. And I've been pulled out of buses so many times where everyone else got to sit in the bus and been harassed for this and that. And I had a great deal of trouble getting the paperwork I needed. My life was at risk more than once. A region that should have perhaps taken 6 or 7 weeks for me to cross through ended up taking 9 or 10 months. I started getting what are they called, migraines, really bad migraines. I never had migraines in my entire life, but they started kicking in, and I was losing weight. I got cerebral malaria. I lost my financial partnership. I almost lost my partner, this wonderful woman that I had when I left home. We were in a long distance relationship, and it was unbelievably shaky. And 2 years in, the bubble had burst. It was so clear to me that nobody cared about what I was doing. Nobody cared. Social media wasn't growing, it was declining. The Red Cross was busy doing humanitarian work. They weren't necessarily interested in having a guy travel around with a hat to every country without flying. And I wasn't interested in the overall goal of reaching every country without flying anymore. It had just lost its weight. So it was so easy to quit and give up. Yeah, that was a rough time for me.
And where did you find the strength?
It's such a good question. Mainly because I'm not sure I have the answer. Uh, as we talked about, I've been home for a year now, and in a way, a year is a long time. But I mean, out of 10 years, I'm still on the return path. I'm still trying to adjust to a somewhat normal life and being back home. And I'm reflecting on many things from this. And one of the things is, why did I not quit back then? Why did I keep fighting? I think in part it's because I was able to activate something deep inside myself, which is just this unbelievable stubbornness. Sort of, I'm going to show them. Nobody's going to tell me what I can do and what I can't do. No one's going to be able to break me. I will fight for this until I drop. I think that's a part of it. And in part, it was certainly also because 2 years in, I had met hundreds, thousands of people, and I'd had the help and support of so many people who would pour me a cup of tea or give me a place to sleep or help me with a translation, and people were cheering for me. Not millions of people, but certainly I met so many good people along the way who were helping out and supporting me, and I didn't want all the help and support that they gave me to just go up in thin air because I couldn't hack it. I wanted to deliver on my promise to people that I was going to every country without flying.
Hmm. Hey guys, quick break from the podcast to tell you about job stacking. If you're a remote or hybrid worker looking to maximize your earning potential, then Rolf Haltze, author of Job Stacking, guarantees you'll be able to double your income by implementing his paycheck multiplication layering method. This is the exact system Rolf has used to take his own income and those of many others beyond $20K a month. With this method, Rolf contractually guarantees that you'll be able to double your income in 45 days. So, if you're interested in unleashing your earning potential and doubling your income, then click the link in the description and book a call with Rolf right now. Hey guys, quick break from the episode to tell you about BitRefill. BitRefill allows you to shop online and in person without banks, converting your crypto directly into merchant balance. We're talking gift cards to Nike, Amazon, Apple, Airbnb, Hotels.com, and many more, all paid for with crypto. BitRefill offers more than 10,000 gift card options in 180 countries all across Latin America, including Brazil, Colombia, Mexico, Argentina, El Salvador, and many more. You can also apply the code MyLatinLife at checkout to get 10% back on your first purchase. Go to bitrefill.com for more information. And I definitely want to get to the reverse culture shock and the adapting back to society, because it's a really interesting topic that we talk about a lot among
Okay.
expats and digital nomads. But before we do, let's click in on these bus trips and stuff in Central Africa for a second, because I've experienced a little bit of this in Latin America. You say, hey, what city are you going to? Oh, we're going to the next city. Okay, and how much is it? Oh, it's $3. Okay, cool. When's the bus leaving? Okay, 10 minutes. Okay, cool. And then you think you're ready to go, and then like, no, we're waiting for more people. You're like, how are you waiting for more people? The bus is already full. And then there's more people, and the thing is like jam full. And then you're going, maybe it breaks down on the highway. I had one time where my bus broke down, and so I started, doing the thumb on the side of the highway. This is in
Yeah.
Bolivia, and the bus broke down. I'm doing the thumb on the side of the highway so someone else will pick me up. And the bus driver started getting mad at me and being like, no, you're sticking with my bus. You're sticking with my bus. I'm like, dude, I'll give you $3. It doesn't matter. I just want to go with someone else. He's like, no. Now everyone is going to desert my bus and they're not going to pay. So you can't leave. You can't go on the next bus. I'm like, fucking, this is like crazy things. And I'm sure in Africa, it's 10x the insanity.
Yeah, well, I mean, on some days it is, but for the most part, it's exactly what you were describing. It's like that, but it's never ending. The next day it's like that. The next day it's like that. It just continues. I remember for such a long time, the most common thing within public transportation was that it would break down. I would be surprised if you could go between A and B without at least one breakdown, and then everyone gets off and they change a tire or they look into the hood or whatever they do. And the hassle of, I mean, you could show up at a bus terminal or a taxi terminal. You have bush taxis are used a lot throughout certain countries, where you have maybe a Toyota Corolla and you manage to get 10, 11, or 12 people inside it and a lot of luggage and then you go. And if you're the first one, then you're sitting around waiting for it to fill up, like you said, and that can be a long day sometimes. Just where are people, and you start to bargain with yourself if you should just buy out the seats so you
Yep.
could start going.
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, lots and lots of craziness on that account, but there was something beautiful about, especially, I mean, sometimes with the buses, but especially smaller types of transport, like minibuses or these often Toyota Corollas. It would become like family. Like you get into that vehicle, and now we are a team. And when there's something you have to deal with, if you have to stop and get something to eat, if there's a checkpoint, if there's someone in a uniform who's harassing, if there's a baby that's crying, we're a team and we're going to do this together. And it's like a really beautiful bonding experience a lot of the time, which I did enjoy. uh, I remember this one time this has got to be in Western Africa. I have to check on that someday. I just still have the memory. We're in a jungle and we're in a four-wheel drive, and there are three women on the back seat, and I'm next to the driver. And the driver is male, and we have all the luggage up on the roof of this four-wheel drive, and we're going, and plenty of space. Only three people in the back, and I am alone on my chair because quite frequently you can have two people in the passenger seat, and sometimes two people in the driver's seat, and four legs between the pedals, and that kind of stuff. But so we're going down this jungle road, and there's a checkpoint, and God knows I've seen plenty of checkpoints, and you do your little dance, and you're usually through. But for some reason, they seem to believe that I was in cahoots with an immigration officer at the border when I entered the country because I didn't have a receipt for my visa, and they were going to call the police, and I was tied into corruption, and maybe it was even a fake visa I had in my passport, and they were just building on this story. They were trying to shake me for some money, and I didn't want to pay any bribes anywhere, so I wasn't doing that. And then eventually they did call the police, and then the police came over, and the situation heated up a bit. And then the driver from our vehicle came over to me and said, "Point out which luggage? What's your luggage? Which bag is yours? I'm going to take it off. We can't wait for you. We're leaving you." And I just felt like this guy's stabbing me in the back. Like, we are a team. We're dealing with things together. It's always like that. All of these vehicles. Like, why are you deserting me here at this checkpoint? And they were harassing me and harassing me. And then eventually they gave up and allowed me to continue with my fellow passengers in this four-wheel drive. And I go, finally, thank you. And I'm pretty upset. And I get back inside this vehicle, and I'm next to the driver, and I'm looking at the driver, and I'm kind of like I'm slipping him a couple of remarks, like, "That was really nice of you. That was really friendly. You're going to leave me. You're going to leave me." And then one of the women on the back seat, she says, "He helped you." And I go, "What are you talking about?" And she says, "Yeah, he helped you. He was never going to leave you. There's no way he was going to leave you. But by pretending he put pressure on the checkpoint. And that's why they let up and let you go, because they didn't want you to be left behind. And then they would have to deal with me at the checkpoint overnight and this kind of stuff."
Mhm.
So again, it's this story of being a team and working together. I was just so white and so foreign that I didn't understand what was going on. But there's some beauty in a lot of those experiences, but there's a great deal of hardship as well.
Wow. Yeah, I'm sure we could double click on so many things. I'll hit a random one. I'm not sure if this can be a good story or not, but I've heard Sao Tome and Principe, which is the island
Mm,
off the coast of Africa,
yeah.
can be hard to get to.
Yeah, yeah, it was. So the vessel I went to Sao Tome with eventually sank and took lives. It didn't sink while I was on board. I made it across. But a traveler asked me how I got there, and I listed the name of the vessel, and the port, and he went to the port, and he says, "Yeah, that one's at the bottom of the sea." And then the vessel that I left Sao Tome with, I remember the name of that one was called Amphitrite. and I couldn't come back. I left from Gabon to Sao Tome, and I wanted to come back to Gabon, but that just wasn't possible. And it took a long time, and then finally I bartered my way on board this Amphitrite, which took me back to Cameroon and created all sorts of problems for me. And that one sank as well. There are three of the vessels I traveled on board are confirmed to be at the bottom of the sea today. And the nature of these vessels, they're in so poor condition. They call them soul sellers, and the soul seller is a code name for a vessel which has been run into the ground. It's been sold again and again and again, and every time it's been bought up by someone, it's been ripped from some equipment. So there's less and less. There's no safety equipment left on board, and they fill these vessels with passengers and cargo way above capacity. And probably not many of the seafarers on board actually know what they're doing. I imagine the captain does, and maybe the chief engineer, and everyone else is a cousin or a friend or someone who needed a job. And I mean, the engine, and there are holes in the side, and they're rusty. And a lot of these vessels are not even constructed for the conditions they're heading into. So as long as the ocean is calm and flat, everything is good. But you start to get swell and wind, they go down, and then they go down with everyone on board. So yeah, it's like
Three
Russian
vessels
roulette.
across the whole thing have sunk. So of
Yeah,
the three that
this
sunk,
is what
two were
this
South
is.
Tome.
Yeah, two of them were South Tome. Yeah, so that was your entry. You were talking about South Tome.
Okay, I guess I nailed it on that one. It makes me think. So, how much did you learn about sailing? Like, how much were you taking like an active role? Because I know it is pretty easy or pretty common. Like sailors or sailing vessels are very often looking for crew members.
Yeah,
Sometimes they're like recreational yachts or things like that, and they're down for you to just travel for free if you can be a contributing crew member. Did you learn a lot about sailing, and as you mentioned, like the gusts and the winds and the terminology and the starboard and bow, and I don't know, I know there's like a million things with yachting and sailing and so forth. Did you end up learning a
yeah.
lot?
I learned how to clean barnacles off the bottom of these vessels. That was my level. So there's this growth on the bottom of these vessels, and it slows them down. And it was mostly within the Caribbean that I joined sailboats and motorboats and yachts and this kind of stuff. Once I mean, around the African coast, it was actually there was a sailboat. There was a sailboat that took me from Senegal and out to Cape Verde. So Senegal is Western
Uh-huh.
Africa, and Cape
Yeah.
Verde is west of that. But that was a guy who wanted to go across the Atlantic Ocean. He wanted to go to the Caribbean and do some humanitarian work. And he was going to smoke a lot of weed on the way there. And I managed to convince him to go by Cape Verde just as a test run before crossing the entire Atlantic, which was a good idea because we were taking in a lot of water, and also the automatic pilot for his sailboat didn't function, so he had to have that repaired. But apart from that, it became container ships for African island nations, and especially throughout the Pacific. Some cruise ships here and there. One hospital ship,
Mm.
a Christian hospital ship. But yeah, I traveled with 40 container ships, and
Wow.
the ones that I went with, they had their they knew their business. You know, they were highly regulated. Everything was fine. Everyone was well trained, and certificates and this kind of stuff. And to join those vessels, you basically can't anymore. It's not completely true. You can. I did, but it's such a hassle. It's sort of like going into an office somewhere in the city and then asking the receptionist if you can sleep on the floor. And then she'll go like, "Are you nuts? Like, why would I let you sleep? Well, you have plenty of space. I can sleep right there. I won't bother anyone." I go like, "No, get out of here, you bum. Go and find a hostel." like these container ships, they will go like, yeah, we might have space for you, but it's certainly not our business to take a passenger, and we don't know what kind of trouble you're going to bring our way. Maybe immigration or customs in the next country is going to be upset with us, or you could get sick, or you could, we don't want you on board. So it's really, really a hassle.
What's
um,
the trick? You have to be like, hire me or something.
yeah, well, so here's the thing. If you want them to hire you, that's, it used to be like that, but you'd have to go back maybe to the 70s or the 80s, where you could just walk inside a port and talk to the captain, and then you work in the galley, or you'd clean, or you'd paint, or something like this. And but today you need all sorts of training and permits. So you start on land, and you probably do at least 6 months, maybe 1 year school, maritime school. Then you need a contract. They're not going to put you on board without a contract, because you need your insurance and you need your seaman's book. Then once you're on board, they're not going to let you go at the next port, because now you're working for them, right? So that it's not going to happen. Plus, it's probably a 2 year investment on your part to get on board by getting a job. And then when 9/11 happened, they introduced ISPS, which is security, extra security within the port. It's basically terror security. So
Right.
you can't walk inside an international port anymore. They're well guarded,
Right.
and
And now it's
you,
like a migrant thing. You know.
yeah.
So how did you talk your way onto 40 different container ships? Sounds like you probably have a
Yeah.
bunch.
Well, I'd say the first one is probably the hardest one. Then once you get on one, you can start referencing that you were a passenger and you know how it works and this kind of stuff. And then you might also have a leg in with the first company, and they might have more than one ship, or have different connections, or they know people and they can introduce you. So the first ship is in some ways really the hardest one. But yeah, I mean, there are so many different shipping companies, and big ones and small ones, and you need to make your case that it's a good idea for them to bring you on board their ship and go through the hassle and extra paperwork. So it's about incentive. And what kind of incentive can you bring to a shipping line? It's down to pretty much nothing. If you have a big following online, and big is not 10,000 followers, probably not. Like, you have to have a big following online. Then maybe you could argue that you can make a promotion, or you'll make a video and it'll be seen by so and so many people, and you'll put them in a good light. That would be incentive. Or if you're working, if you're a journalist, or you get to write an article for, not for your local newspaper, but for someone big, CNN or who knows what, then that might get their attention. Or you have a noble cause. I mean, if you can argue really well for your cause, you're raising money for a
Who do you talk
school.
to? Who do you talk to the captain? Or
No, so not unless the captain is also the owner of the ship. The captain's going to do whatever the owners say, and if the captain has the power to greenlight you and bring you on board. But if the shipping company doesn't agree with that, they fire the captain. So the captain's not going to do anything. You have to go through the shipping company. And you can call them and they'll just send you around. Like, they don't have a department for people who want to get on board container ships. So they'll just send you around. And if you email them, they're more than likely to ignore your email. If you do get a reply, it's usually just a polite reply to say no, and they will give you. And this is good information for you. So they will tell you that they can't do it because it's against the law. That's almost certainly not true. That's just an excuse to say no to you. They'll say they can't do it because of insurance. That's almost certainly also not true. I mean, I've never had an issue with insurance. They just sign you on board the ship's insurance. They might say that it's against regulations. And with that, they might mean their own regulations, that they don't take passengers. But it always comes down to one person. You talk to the right person, and someone says, "Yeah, I like you. It's okay," and then they tell everyone else, "We're bringing this person," and then you get on board. So it's getting through to that one person, but you don't know who that person is, right? So it's a lot of people telling you no, and you not getting discouraged. You just keep going. You keep knocking on doors. Um, they might say, "We would love to take you, but we do not have any spare cabins," and that could be true. It could be a lie, but it could be true because they are legally bound to give you a bunk. It's a safety thing with maritime safety regulations.
Okay. Switching gears a little bit. So I noticed on
Yeah,
your website it says um, all 206 or 209 countries in the world,
203.
203. A lot of people say 193 or
Yeah,
197.
everyone else is wrong. I got the right number. Everyone else is wrong.
Okay,
No,
what's the extra
it's
six?
it's a stupid thing. Countries, right? It's a you can debate countries to the end of it calls for some really good red wine, and, and then you start talking about what the heck is a country? Do you need to
Uh-huh.
have military? Evidently not. Plenty of countries do not have their own military. Do you need to have your own currency? No, apparently not. Like, what makes a country?
You gotta be
There,
recognized by the UN or something.
there's the UN list. The UN list is the only thing that really, really, really matters
Did you
if you
ever
want to
go out of
prove
your
anything.
way to go to a semi-recognized jurisdiction
Yes.
just to be sure that I got to make sure I get the semis?
Yeah. Yeah. The Vatican. I had to spend 24 hours in the Vatican, and they close at night and don't open until the morning. So, I mean, like that was a rough one. Um, here's the thing. So it's 193. This is because it's United Nations. They have two observer states. That's Palestine and the Vatican, right?
Uh-huh.
So a lot of people will include that, and then for some reason, a lot of people will include Kosovo, probably because Kosovo has a lot of backing, international backing. I think about 100 UN countries recognizes Kosovo as a country. So 196, and then anything beyond that is personal politics, and maybe it's based on religion, or I don't know. A lot of island nations in the Pacific are offended by 193 counters that do not go to Nui or some other island nation out there that firmly believe that they're a country,
Mhm.
and it gets really, really tricky. Country isn't really a recognized term. You would have to say a state, or I mean, there are different. It becomes silly. I'll tell you what I did though. So, 193 United Nations. Then I took Palestine and Vatican on top, and Kosovo, as we mentioned. Then I did Western Sahara. Then I did Taiwan after China because you don't want to get in trouble with China. And then I split the UK and did Wales, Northern Ireland, and Scotland, as
Uh-huh.
well as England. And I split the Danish kingdom. So I also made my way to Faroe Islands and to Greenland.
Uh-huh.
And you can argue quite reasonably for this. Denmark is a part of the EU. Greenland is not. So how can you have a part of your country that's not? I mean, so the Danish kingdom is made up of three countries. The Faroe Islands have some fishing practices which are debated every year, where they kill a bunch of whales. And Denmark, as a country, is boycotting the Faroe Islands based on that, or certainly did in the past. You can't boycott yourself. So, I mean, all of these things sort of speak to that these are different entities, but they're not recognized by United Nations. And then
I didn't know Danish politics was so spicy. Um,
yeah, we're
we
having
got
a lot of
we're
fun.
about 5 minutes left here,
Okay.
and you might know when we say bye, just hang on for like 10 seconds so we make sure the
Yeah,
audio uploads. I
sure.
wanted to end things off with kind of the topic of reverse culture shock and what you're looking to do now. I had a previous podcast guest recently, the Swedish gringo, Swedish guy. He's been living in Brazil for a couple of years, and he's like, it's very difficult for me to try to readapt to society in Sweden just because people are colder and I just the lifestyle and this and that. For you, it must be 10x that in terms of trying to adapt back to society if you even want to, or and you've had all these observations in the past year, I'm sure. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, it's not easy at all. I think most people who go on holiday for a couple of weeks will recognize that there's a bit of transition between going on a holiday for a couple of weeks and coming home. You're still looking out the window, dreaming, and that's just a small holiday. Then you have expats that live abroad for years. They have a hard time. Soldiers, they're shipped
Mm,
overseas and come back after maybe just 6 months, but have some very compelling and often extreme stories to tell. And some of those soldiers, they need months or years to come back home, and some of them don't make it home at all. And I fear that I'm in the not coming home at all category. This is by far the hardest thing I've ever done in my life. I've been wanting to go home since 2015, and I finished in 2023. It was such a struggle. There's a lot of beauty in what I did, but it's such a struggle, and it takes up a lot of space in my head. And then you come home to a world which has gradually changed. But it's not just that. I lost my attachment to my own country. I love my country. I speak the language. I know the seasons and the culture. But what am I doing in Denmark? Like, why there? I spent 2 years in Hong Kong during the pandemic. When the pandemic broke out, I got stuck in Hong Kong. I feel so much more attached to Hong Kong. I have really good friends that I was meeting up with several times a week in Hong Kong for a couple of years. The friends I have in Denmark, they moved on. You know, they have other friends. They have uh, different clubs and activities they do with people I don't know, and they have kids, and yeah. So it's I love my country. It's a beautiful country. Denmark is fascinating. It has an interesting history, and we have some culture. But my goodness, why am I here? And I have a wife, this woman that I left back home. And we had a long distance relationship which lasted throughout, and we got engaged and we got married twice. She came out to visit me 27 times, and she's my anchor. So I know wherever she is, that's where I'm going to be. But if she decides to take a job in the US, then we're going to the US. I don't feel attached to Denmark, and I'm working on it. I'm going to museums. I'm trying to tie myself, learn the history, learn my own country better. I did a kayak trip, extreme kayak trip recently, where I went around the biggest island in Denmark, which is 450K. It took me 17 days to do that. And it was just to give me some headspace to think some things through. Who am I, and what did I do, and what's important to me? And also to see the coastline of my country and meet the people along the way. And I found that the people that I met were just as kind as people I've met anywhere else in the world. And that was really important to me in my homecoming, to see that,
mm.
people are just people in Denmark too. But
That's
yeah,
beautiful.
I have some way to go before I feel at home, I think.
Yeah, it's an interesting topic. I definitely wish we could dive a little bit deeper in that, but that's all we have time for today. Thor, thank you so much for joining us on the My Latin Life podcast. It's been a pleasure.
The pleasure's been all mine. Thank you for having me.
My guest again, Thor Pedersen. All the links will be in the show notes. Thank you to Thor for joining us today. Thank you to the audience for listening. This episode of the My Latin Life podcast is brought to you in part by Bit Refill. Bit Refill is the best way to spend your crypto in Latin America. Purchase gift cards or mobile refills from more than 3,500 brands in 186 countries instantly, safely, and privately. Visit bitrefill.com for more information. This episode of the My Latin Life podcast is brought to you in part by Job Stacking. Introducing Rolf Haltze's Paycheck Multiplication Layering Method, a revolutionary approach that redefines the traditional career path. This is Rolf's new Done With You program, where he'll work with you to implement job stacking for yourself. With this method, Rolf contractually guarantees that you'll be able to double your income in 45 days. So, are you ready to step out of the shadows of job insecurity and step into a world of career abundance? Then just click the link in the description of this episode, book a call with Rolf, and start walking the path of unleashing your earning potential with job stacking.